All right. So the PDF that I've shared with you of the book, as you can see, is translated by someone named Brad Walquist. Brad Walquist is a dear friend of mine. I've known him since college, and he has a long history with this book. The lecture I'm about to give, he came to my classes and gave years ago. And the first couple times I heard it, I was like, wow, this is great. I mean, what happened is he actually just came to visit me. And he heard that he did not know this, but he said, oh, maybe I'll come to your class today. He said, I'm here visiting. And so I said, sure, you can come sit in on my class. And I told him what I was teaching, and I didn't know this. He and I had been out of contact for a while. And he said, well, I'm working on a translation of that book. I know it very well. Would you like me to do a presentation on it in your class? And he was going to be staying with me for about a week. So we planned that into his visit for him to come and give a presentation. I had no idea what he was going to say. I had my own sort of perspective on the book as I was preparing to teach it. But when he gave his presentation, I realized how deeply valuable and insightful it was. And so by the third or fourth time I heard it, because he came to all my classes and gave the presentation, um, I realized, I should take some notes for future reference. So if I use this book again, I can give this lecture. And so the lecture you're about to hear is actually Brad's lecture, the translator of this book. And much of the content from the lecture, he would say is not his content, but things that he learned from a Taoist teacher that he had when he traveled to China to study the book and to study Tai Chi meditation, which is a type of meditation that people who sort of follow Taoist philosophy often practice. You might have seen, that old guy in the park just kind of doing these slow, standing and doing these slow movements. It looks like martial arts in slow motion is at least one way to do Tai Chi meditation. And that's what Brad was studying. So um, he would tell you, and what he liked to do actually before he gave the presentation on the book is he liked to tell you about a little bit about himself to try to explain how the book had become so important to him. Because he really started the lecture by saying that in his view, this book saved his life. That is what he literally said um, to my students when he came to present the book. He said, this book saved my life. It's very dear to me. And it is the case that over many centuries, many people would say that this book is extremely important to them. Um, In fact, it's as important as any work of literature to many people, as anything that's ever been written, has had huge influence on especially Eastern philosophy and religious thought, philosophical and religious thought. So Brad, talked about his life, and he led quite a fascinating life. I'm not going to go into the details here, but he's led, yeah, many lives really, where he's traveled much of the world and had all these different professions. And he and I, as I said, met in college. He's one of the most interesting people I've ever known. And as part of his life story, there was a time, and it was shortly after he and I had something of a falling out. And it was not because of something that happened with us, but it was actually because of a disagreement between a woman that it was his wife at the time and my wife at the time, who both happened to be named Amy. And they had something of a falling out. And so, as sometimes happens, he and I were kind of forced to choose. And so he and I didn't speak for many years. And during those years, a lot happened in his life, including the events that led him to begin to carefully study this book. And really, what happened was he went through a divorce from um, his Amy at the time, and found himself deeply deeply depressed, deeply sad. And so he wasn't sure what he was going to do next, and he began to study Taoism, even though he grew up in a conservative Christian home. But he just felt like he was looking for new answers, and he started to study Taoism. And again, to make a quite a long story short, and he spent the time telling the story, and the students, I think, were quite amazed by the twists and turns of his life. Um, but to make a long story short, at a certain point, he did go to China to study this book for a few months. And that's what he did all day, every day for a number of months. And the way he told it, that when he first sort of arrived and was speaking with the mentor about the book, the mentor asked him, "What do you think this book is?" And if any of you opens a PDF and you take a look at it, many of us would say, well, it looks like a bunch of poems. Looks like a collection of poems. And so here's where I'm going to kind of start to share the screen, because his mentor was quite insistent on the point that this is not a bunch of poems. He said, yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen here. So he said, this is not a book of poetry. He said, this is a how-to book. The Tao Te Ching is a how-to book. How to what? How to live. So it's a book on how to live. And his mentor really kind of felt like this, a Western misunderstanding is to see it as sort of like an art book, and we read poetry because we want to read something beautiful. But he saw it as really a practical guide for a person who is trying to figure out how to live their life, and not just for an individual, but actually for entire societies, how societies should function, how they should be governed, etc. So what he did is he said, if we're going to try to understand how to live, and this is really the case of any philosophy, I guess, you would say, well, what would be the sort of key concepts? And Brad's mentor indicated that for Taoism, there are two key concepts to understand in sort of Taoist thinking. And so the two key words are, so we go here. The first one is change. So the one thing that Lao Tzu, the author of the book, points out is that we live in a world that is characterized by change, right? Things are always kind of changing, shifting. I think maybe a good example is just sort of like the drive to school. You have this sort of chaos going on around you. I would use this example when I would give this lecture in person to my students, and we all had just arrived from driving on 280 or whatever we were driving to get there, 101. And we say, in a way, that's kind of what the world is like. There's always things that are happening. Change is always happening. And so the world and even our own lives can feel quite unstable. The news, you get this piece of news, you get that piece of news. Stuff is always going on. Um, yes, I will have a recorded version of the two-sensor question. We'll have a recorded version of this lecture for available too. But if you can take notes now, great, if you'd like to. Um, so that's the nature of the world, right? And it's unstable and it's constantly in flux, and things are always happening, and people come and go from our lives, and people die, and so that's just the nature of the world. And then he said, but the second key word then is balance. And what Lao Tzu argues is that what Taoism is trying to teach is how can one have balance in a world that is constantly changing. Now, unlike a lot of philosophies, the key word here, or the ambition of Taoism, is not happiness. Happiness, according to Lao Tzu, will come and go. But what we want to seek to find in our lives is balance. So we want to be at some level unlike the world. The world is constantly changed and is highly imbalanced, but that's not gonna serve us. What we need to try to have in the midst of all this change, all this chaos, is balance, right? So how does that happen? As I say, this is the quote, the secret to if we what in the West we might call happiness, but really the secret to a fulfilling, rich life is to have balance in a world of change. So that's why he writes the book, Tao Te Ching, which I'm going to translate as the Book of the Way. That's how it's often translated. That's not an exact literal translation. In fact, Brad proposed some different answers, but Tao is usually translated as way. It can also be translated as sort of the path, although that's more of a Western way of thinking of it. We could say the book of the truth, if you'd like. The truth of what? The truth of how to live. So these are alternative sort of interpretations because we can't get an exact translation of Tao in English and maybe in any other language. But some kind of possible ways of understanding it would be path, truth, and even here the book of love. Now, why do we say love? Because the person who has balance in this world of change is likely to be recognizable because they will be a loving person. Balanced people tend to be capable of love. Imbalanced people tend to struggle with being loving, at least in some kind of way that is consistent. This is what Lao Tzu claims in any case. And so whether you think of it as the book of the way or the truth or the book of love, the point is that is the ultimate state that we are aspiring to, that we want to live in. We want to live in the Tao, in the way, right? So Jing is often translated as the book or text, again, not exactly literal, but so we can see so it's the book of the way. The syntax is reversed, but we get the idea. This is kind of a more complicated term too, because the simple way is just say, well, it's the book of the way, but it's more than that. It's the book of the process of the way, the book of the power of the way. It can mean also. So if you live the Tao, if you live the way, it's empowering to you. To have this balance in a world of change is quite empowering. And so this is a book about that kind of empowerment. What you gain in your life from living the way, and what you gain is a kind of power that can also be captured by the Chinese expression kung fu. Now, I hear and forgive so if we have Chinese speakers, they can, I'm sure, modify some of what I'm saying here, but I'm trying to express these in ways that Westerners can kind of understand. Kung Fu, when I hear that expression, I think of a form of martial arts. Like I kind of think of like Bruce Lee, you know, beating people up. But Kung Fu, properly understood from what I remember of what Brad had to say about it, Kung Fu is the kind of skill that you get from consistent, regular practice. That if you practice something properly, consistently, you develop a kind of expertise that could be described in Chinese as kung fu. And so, in fact, Brad told a story about this. He said when he was talking about this concept with his mentor, there was a time when they went to dinner, and at the dinner, but Brad's mentor didn't talk very much, especially when they would sit down to eat. But on this particular occasion, they were sitting eating, and the mentor at some point sort of tapped his bowl with his chopsticks and looked up to Brad and said, "This chef has kung fu." So, meaning that the chef, when the chef was being a chef, had to possess the power that you get from living the Tao, the way. In other words, the chef, when when the chef was cooking, was balanced. And you think, well, what does that mean? How does a chef be balanced? And so, in order to understand that, we have to have a couple more key ideas because Lao Tzu is actually pretty clear, although when you're actually reading the book, it doesn't always seem clear. Um, but the way the mentor explained is that there are two key ideas to help us understand what it means to have this balance that gives you power, right? And so the key ideas are yi and qi. And some of you guys might be familiar with these two ideas, especially we talk about our qi. A person's qi in Chinese can be sort of meaning like their body's life energy. That every living creature, but we can talk about humans, we all have a qi. We all have this sort of energy, this life force that emanates from us. And the qi can be sometimes more powerful, sometimes diminished, based on how well we're feeling, how well we are caring for ourselves. When we're feeling sick, our chi can be sort of, smaller and less forceful. When we're feeling great, our chi you can feel when someone walks in the room and they're really healthy and their chi is their life force is quite strong. So we can understand that concept relatively simply, your chi. But what is this thing called yi? So in the West, we also have this kind of duality where you have what is essentially the body and the mind, right? Or the psyche, or sometimes in the West we refer to it as the soul. Um, in Taoism, you have the yi, which is your mind, or more specifically, your awareness. So the way Brad explained this, and we can't really duplicate. I mean, we could try, but what he did with his class, or with my class, with the class when he was giving the lecture, when he was trying to explain the yi, he said to everyone, "Take a moment and close your eyes." And so everybody sitting in the class would kind of close their eyes. And he'd say, "Now imagine that you're in your bedroom." Now, obviously, some of you actually are in your bedroom right now, so you could maybe close your eyes and imagine yourself somewhere else at work or whatever. But he said, imagine you're in your bedroom, and everybody sit there and they're all imagining they're in their bedroom. And he said, kind of look around your room. Is the bed made? Is it clean or is it messy? Uh, is the closet full or is it open? Or, is there what's hanging on the walls? And so everybody's sitting there with their eyes closed and sort of mentally scanning around their bedroom. Is the light on? Is there a window? What, curtains, what have you? And everybody's kind of looking around their rooms and they're in their mind. And he says, so then he said to the class, "So where were you just now?" And they're like, "Well, I was in my bedroom." He said, "Yeah, so your yi, your awareness, had traveled to your bedroom, but your chi was still here." And then basically what he said is, so what you just did is exactly what Lao Tzu says you should try to avoid doing. And the students are kind of like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And he said, you separated your yi from your chi. Your body was in one place and your mind was somewhere else. And what Lao Tzu argues is anytime we do that, we lose our balance. That in order to be balanced in our lives, to put it using these terms, our yi has to be with our chi. Our mind needs to be where our body is. And that means not just like, well, and what it literally means is being present, right? Being present where you are. You aren't living somewhere else. So to go back to this, the slideshow here, your chi is your life force. It emanates from your core, somewhere around your belly button. And the idea is to keep those things together. So this is the whole purpose of meditation, of Tai Chi meditation, for example, is to, as you're meditating, keep your mind with your body. Don't have your mind wander. Think about what you need to do later in the day. Think about what you did yesterday. Think about the argument that you had with your parents. Think about the homework you have to do. Because anytime you start doing that, you start to lose your balance. So when the chef was being a chef, the chef was completely present and focused on what they were doing. They were chopping the carrots, they were whatever it was that they were doing, they were present there. And in the food, you could taste that balance, that expertise that they got from having your tea with your chi. And there are a lot of ways that we can work to do this. There are a lot of different meditative practices that we could have. For some people, it might be playing the piano. For some people, it might be gardening. For some people, it might be going on a walk. For some people, it might be playing a sport. But when they do those things, their mind is not somewhere else. They're absolutely focused on what they're doing, right? And that gives you balance and it's empowering. And despite the chaos around you, you're just fine. Okay. So the things that help us to develop this balance, one is having some kind of meditative practice in your life. Again, it might be carpentry, sewing, uh, whatever it is that you do, taking care of a child, where you are completely present in that act. That's going to be a good thing in your life. You're going to, and over time, you're going to end up being very good at it. Also, the book can help. It can help uh, focus the mind and remind us what's important. So the going to then to the book. Actually, I want to pause here. Um, there's a couple things I'll say. I mentioned like playing sports, which is something that a lot of young people do as frankly as a meditative practice, because when they play sports, they feel fully alive, and the reason they do is because their mind's not somewhere else. They're focused on what they're trying to do. And the people who are best at sports tend to be very good at not being distracted and very balanced and focused. In fact, Brad's mentor apparently loved to golf. That was one of his meditative practices. And this was, of course, years ago. But Brad's mentor was a big fan of Tiger Woods, who was this amazing golfer, um, one of the great golfers ever. And whenever Brad's mentor wanted to help Brad kind of appreciate this concept of kung fu and balance and having your yi with your chi, he would say, when Tiger Woods golfs, he has kung fu because his mind and his body are completely balanced together and focused on what he's doing. And he's present where he is. His mind is clear. Sometimes athletes describe this as sort of like being in the zone, right? Where it's as if, all difficulty kind of disappears and you're making every shot, you're doing everything right. And great athletes develop this ability. I'm a big fan of Stephen Curry, the guy on the Warriors, develop this ability to be fully present when practicing, in his case, basketball. It could be whatever. But what you see then is you see this kind of balance, this ability to like close out all the chaos around you and perform at your highest level with joy. right? With a certain uh, fulfillment that life can offer, according to Lao Tzu, when we have this kind of balance that you achieve when your mind and body are one. Okay. So, in order to achieve this kind of balance, Brad's mentor and Brad together developed what they call these 8 themes that you see repeating in the book. Okay. So before I cover the 8 themes, and they'll be valuable to you when we actually turn our attention to the book and you're reading it, because you'll be able to say, because the book can at times seem quite abstract, you'll be able to say, oh, okay, this is that theme that he's discussing here. And it helps make the book more approachable, especially if it's your first time trying to read it. But before I get to that, let me go ahead. I'm going to pause the recording for a second. Yeah, so 8 themes that we find in the book that help us um, develop this mindset, this balanced mindset. The first of the themes is really interesting. Brad actually tells a story about it, where this was the first time that Brad had traveled to China. He traveled to one of the many huge cities in China. I forget which one it was. It's not like Shanghai or Beijing, but one of the other cities with millions of people. And it was his first time he was ever there. And the direction that he had was just to go to this big apartment building. It wasn't some sort of romantic thing of like going on the top of some mountain somewhere with this guru. It was just he showed up at this guy's apartment, took the elevator up, and he knocked on the door. And the mentor opened the door and looked at Brad and said, "Welcome home." And Brad's like, "Welcome home?" I'm, I'm halfway around the world in a country I've never been to before, in a city I don't know anything about, unable to speak the language. How is this home? Was the thought that he had. But this ends up being the first of the 8 themes. And what Brad came to understand, what his mentor meant by this, was he was communicating to Brad, Brad, you are your own home. Home is not a place outside of yourself. You are your own home, and you have to learn to feel welcome there. And Brad said this was actually for him had been a real problem, was he just didn't feel, well, his whole life he traveled around, he moved here, moved there, always searching for like the spot that felt like home. And also in relationships, trying to find this person that was going to feel like home. And his mentor was trying to communicate this idea from the Tao Te Ching that we must come to understand ourselves as our home. And why is that the case? Because you are only at home when you are where you are. So if you're homesick, you're thinking, oh, if only I was there, I'd be happy. If I was only with this person, I'd be happy. You're always, your ye is somewhere else, wanting to be somewhere else. Then you're always going to feel imbalanced and unhappy, because the only time that you can feel balanced is when you are with yourself, not trying to be somewhere else. So this is a difficult concept, I think, for not just for Brad, but for many of us. Um, we always imagine that if something could be different about where we are or who we're with or what have you, then our life could be better. But in fact, we are our own home. And if we can develop that concept, it's very empowering to us. No matter where you go, you are at home within yourself. So that's the first of the 8 themes, is welcome home. And it was one that was really important to Brad. And even to this day, I would think he would say that, it's one that he's can sometimes accept and really feel at home with himself, but other times is not so easy. Sometimes it's difficult for ourselves to feel like a safe home. And but Lao Tzu's argument is, in the end, that's the only safe home. All other homes, anything can happen. The weather, natural disasters, theft, loss. The world is characterized by constant change. So you have to make your home within yourself. That's the one thing you actually have control over. The next theme that I think is particularly useful to students is the theme of small steps. And what Lao Tzu says, he says it more than once in the book, is that all great things are accomplished by a series of small steps. This is really, in a nutshell, this is Lao Tzu trying to tell us, don't live in the future. We often get paralyzed, and some of us who have difficulty with procrastination, I know I do, when we think too big. When we think, oh no, I've got to read this book. Oh no, I've got to pass this class. Oh no, I have to graduate from college. When you think too big, what happens is anxiety, because that is your yi traveling into the future. It's not being right where you are. And the minute your yi goes into the future, according to Lao Tzu, you become anxious. So when you say, oh, I've got to write this essay, oof, anxiety, right? Oh, I've got to read this book. So what Lao Tzu says is, no, you don't have to read the book. You have to read a sentence, or you have to read a page. Reduce everything to a manageable step. And now you're just staying right here in the present, and you are able to accomplish it. No, I don't have to learn how to play guitar. I have to learn this chord. This chord of this song. No, I don't have to pass this class. I have to do this one assignment today. And if you do this one assignment today, and then you do the next one assignment tomorrow, and then the day after that, living always just here in the present, at the end of the day, you are likely to pass the class. What gets you in the way of passing the class is being paralyzed by, oh, I have to pass this class. Again, I tend to use examples from sports. It's funny how often you'll listen to a professional athlete get interviewed, let's say after, like last night, if you watched the game last night, the Warriors win the game, and the person interview them after says, wow, it looks like you guys won a couple games in a row. Your record is pretty good. Right now you're in 7th place in the standings, looking good for making the playoffs. And the athlete will almost always respond with something like, one game at a time. We're not worrying about making the playoffs right now. We're worrying about tonight's game. We're worrying about tomorrow's game. Always trying to bring things to a manageable size that keeps you in the present, right? I think a lot of students struggle with this. How do I just focus on the small step I can do today, and then the step I do tomorrow? And in the end, the great thing is accomplished, right? You graduate from college, you get the job that makes yourself and your parents happy. Any great thing is accomplished that way. And you can see examples of this everywhere. Even the chef that the mentor was talking about, when he says the chef has kung fu, the chef didn't sit down and say, I'm going to make an amazing big dinner. The chef said, okay, first I've got to cut the carrots. Okay, next I have to cook the rice. Next I have to do this, I have to do that. And at the end of the day, you've made this amazing meal. But you were always just focused on the small step that you had to do right then as part of the process. So this is an idea that Lao Tzu returns to over and over because, again, this goes back to the concept of keeping your yi with your chi, of living in the present and not allowing your yi to go into the future where you're often likely to be paralyzed by anxiety. All right. Step number or theme number 3. So yeah, definitely Lao Tzu is big on humility, but he's not big on humility for the reasons that we might imagine, like, oh, it's just good to be a humble person. It makes you a good person. He's big on humility because he sees it as a way for us to avoid one of the most common traps that people fall into that prevents them from having balance in their life, and that is becoming angry. Angry is an immediate form of imbalance, right? And so he's trying to understand why we become angry. And what he ultimately argues is anger, it's a very interesting idea. Anger is a lack of humility. People who are angry in their anger are not sufficiently humble. How so? They're angry because they think they should be able to change something that they can't. And that's why they're angry. So I'd use the example of like driving to Foothill, and there'd be some guy tailgating me on 280 at 70 miles an hour, and I'd get angry. This fucking guy, upset with the guy that's tailgating me. And now my yi is back in the car, back in his car, yelling at him and trying to change his behavior. But actually, I'm getting really angry because I can't change his behavior. And Lao Tzu would say, and it was ridiculous for you to think that you could, and it lacked humility. The fact is, we can very rarely, essentially never, control other people, a certain outside of violence, which is itself an extreme form of imbalance. And imagining that we could is a lack of humility. Lao Tzu basically observed, and all you have to do is watch the news to see this, angry people are arrogant people. They're people who lack humility. And they're therefore very imbalanced. And so the antidote to anger is humility. And it's recognizing you can't control the world. I would go to my kids' basketball games and I'd get all pissed off at the refs, right? A terrible call. As if I should somehow be able to control the game sitting in the bleachers. Lack of humility. I can't control the refs. I can't control the play of the game. I can't control any of it. I couldn't even control myself, right? Let alone the world. So the way you learn to uh, avoid the trap of anger in your life is by acknowledging the only things that I actually can control are, guess what they are? Your yi and your chi. That's it. And even those things are not always totally within your control, but they're far more in your control than just about anything else. Those are actually the only things that are internal. Everything else is external to you. And sometimes your chi will get sick, maybe out of your control. Um, your yi will get distracted. How quickly can you get undistracted? Bring it back to the present, bring it back to where you are and reestablish balance. But if you go through life thinking you should be able to control your boss, control your ex, control your parents, control your professor, other people, control the guy tailgating you, uh, you're just going to persist in this anger, which is a lack of, from Lao Tzu's point of view, a lack of perspective on the reality of things, which is that we can control very little, and we should humbly acknowledge that. But we can control all that we need to control to be happy. And that is our yi and our qi. This is Lao Tzu's position. Well, why is that? Well, what you have is what you need. This is a good one for people who think they're going to be happy by buying stuff. What I have is what I need. What do you have? You have your yi and your qi. Everything else you might have for a little while. Those things will come and go, whether they be people, things, the best new iPhone, the nicest new Air Jordans. These things might bring a temporary balance, happiness, but in the end, they don't provide lasting fulfillment because they are external to us, and like the rest of the world, will come and go, will change. The iPhone breaks, a new one that comes out that's a lot better. Someone steps on your new tennis shoes and messes them up, or they get stolen. Your sweetheart dumps you and runs off with your best friend. Someone crashes into your car, and now you've lost your savings, so you've got to pay for car repairs. After you just spent all this money on your new car that was one thing you always wanted, if you could just have that car, you'd be happy, right? Well, Lao Tzu saw great danger in placing your balance outside of yourself in something external to you, because those things are not reliable. It's just the nature of the world. Things come and go, right? And so his advice is to say, it's fine, enjoy those things. He doesn't like say, don't get nice stuff. Brad liked to get a nice new coat for each winter. Just understand that you don't need it to have balance in your life. What you need to have balance in your life, you already have, which is your body and your mind, and just take care of those. You can enjoy the other stuff, but you don't need them. And you certainly shouldn't place your well-being or your balance in things that are external to you, whether those be people, things, what have you. And of course, we grew up in a culture, we're constantly getting advertisements bombarded with a message that you don't have what you need. You need all this other stuff, and then you'll be happy. And Lao Tzu does not, well, I'll put it mildly, he does not agree that anything external to you is going to, in the end, bring you the balance that you want to have in your life. All right. Love life. So unlike, and Taoism isn't, I don't think, properly understood as a religion. It's more like a philosophy, because there isn't a god or a deity that you worship. But as a philosophy, it is very much a philosophy that says to enjoy your life. Love your life, live in the present, delight in the good things that you have around you. Absolutely. If you want to enjoy the new iPhone, that's fine. It's not one of those philosophies that says suffer today so that you can be happy tomorrow, right? Something is out of whack if you're not loving your life today. You should probably figure out what that is, instead of saying it's okay if I'm miserable today because one day I'll be happy. Lao Tzu would be very suspicious of that kind of mindset. I know, for example, my poor, well, now former mother-in-law, she grew up in Catholic, and it was very much, her philosophy was like, life is suffering, life is pain, but one day we'll be rewarded and life will be good. So it's okay it's kind of like the more I suffer now, the better, because then I'll really prove that I deserve good things in heaven or somewhere down the road, right? Yeah, Lao Tzu is like, no, you should be loving life right now. And that's aligned actually with the next theme. Don't just love life, love today. Don't live in the future. That's going to make you anxious at a minimum and maybe angry. Don't live in the past. that's going to make you sad, uh, or maybe and or possibly angry. You have to live in the present. That's the that's where life is lived, and that is where balance is possible. Living in the past, you'll be imbalanced by usually sadness, maybe anger. Living in the future, you'll be imbalanced by anxiety. The next number 7 is silence. I had to quickly count there because I remember what the last one is. So silence. So, oops, Lao Tzu is not, he did not say to his, sorry, let me share my screen. Um, he did not say to his, I guess we'll say followers, to people who adopted Taoism as a life philosophy. He did not say, now go out into the world and preach it to everyone else. You don't see Taoist missionaries, because he would argue that that's an attempt to control others, which is never healthy. Um, it's not healthy because you can't. You might temporarily have the illusion that you can, but you can't. So that's why it's not healthy. Um, he said, no, often the best thing for us, and I'm definitely not following this philosophy today, and you guys are patiently listening for an hour, and I appreciate that. Or at least some of you are. Often the best thing for us is silence. He says people talk too much, and usually they talk because they're trying to control others. So you can recognize a balanced person that they are often silent. They just let the world flow, let others do what others do, and they're at peace being silent. I heard about a study once with college students where they asked college students to just go sit in a room in silence for 10 minutes with no cell phone, no distractions. Just an empty room, sit at a table for 10 minutes in silence. And like half of the people after 5 minutes were like going to the door and saying, let me out. They were not able to just sit in silence with no distractions for 10 minutes. So they actually modified the study and they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to put a button on the table where they're sitting. And if they push that button, it's going to give them an electric shock. And again, a large percentage of the people would rather electrocute themselves than just sit silently for 10 minutes, doing absolutely nothing. Their minds needed stimulation, distraction. They couldn't just sit and be quiet with themselves in silence for 10 minutes. So Lao Tzu really argues that a sign of balance and of well-being is your ability to sit in silence and to often be quiet, to not always have to have the last word, to not always, you know, get yourself involved in. Often the best thing is just be quiet. And he saw, I think, a connection between silence and humility and balance and being loving that he admired. And so you will see him in the book recommending silence often. Enough chatter, enough talk. Everybody talks too much. We need more silence. All right, we're almost done. The 8th theme. Mess this up. Oops. Sorry. Look at all these great things we talked about. Let go. Let go. So this really does go to his advice about not living in the past. You live in the past, your yi is not with your chi. If your mind is in the past, your yi is not with your chi, and you will not be happy. You will be imbalanced, perhaps by grief, perhaps by anger, but um, in the end, the only way to have balance is if you live in the present. So in the West, we might have a term for this, which is to forgive. That's not really a word that shows up in the Tao Te Ching, forgiveness. I think maybe because to forgive is maybe to imagine yourself as above the other person, which Lao Tzu would never accept. Uh, but he certainly says, let go of things that are troubling you from the past. Uh, Only by living in the present will you have the balance that you seek. And of course, all of us, as I said, it's part of the nature. Loss is part of life. It's part of that world that is chaotic, constantly changing. Loss is part of it. Many of us have been through heartbreak. Maybe we've been through someone passing away, and we found it hard to let go. Maybe we've had some kind of trauma or something that's happened to us that that's continued to cause us pain. And Lao Tzu understands that's part of the human condition, but ultimately he believes that
With you. Oh, hello.
they,
Oh, sorry.
if you stay stuck back there, bear with me just a moment. I'm not sure who's speaking up there. If you stay stuck back there, then you will feel imbalanced in your life, and um, and won't have the kung fu that comes with living the way. Someone had a thought or a question? Maybe that was an unintentional unmute. Um, so
Oh, yeah,
those
I
are
just
the,
wanted to say sorry about that.
yeah, did you have a question?
Oh, no, no, no. I was just unintentionally.
Oh, yeah, no, no worries. The world, that's the nature of the world. These things happen. I'm still balanced. We're okay. Um, so yeah, let go was the final theme, and a very important theme for Brad, right? Because he was grieving, he was in pain, he was feel like he'd messed up in his life more than once. He'd been through a couple marriages. Um, and so that theme really resonated for him, that he had to somehow reach a point in his life. And ironically, the way he would do it was through meditation, because then it was just constantly bringing his mind to the present, bringing his mind to the present, and not letting it live in the past. And then we could think that some of us might know people that we know who are unhappy, right? And they're unhappy in part because they're stuck in the past. So I don't think this is a revolutionary concept. Let me quickly say that Brad also, in addition to his mentor's 8 themes, he had 4 other themes that I'll quickly point out. They're alternatives, and you might see them in the book. One is the theme "I am alone," and this is kind of a scary one, and and one that even Brad is not entirely um, at peace about. But Lao Tzu is of the opinion that ultimately each one of us is alone in the world. And why is that the case? He said that he had been running from this idea of being alone his whole life, and he was trying to find ways to not feel alone, and going through different relationships and things like that. And he had to reach a point and say, okay, I am alone. And what does Lao Tzu mean by that? He's not actually arguing that you should go off and be alone or that other people are not important, but he is saying that in the end, your yi and your chi are only yours. And another way of understanding this is you might have had that experience where you're kind of sitting with, let's say, someone who's important to you, a sweetheart, a family member, and you've been sitting there and you look at them and you say, "What are you thinking right now?" And they might look at you and say, "Oh, I'm thinking about you, sweetheart." And you look at them and you're like, "Okay." But you don't know if they are, right? Why? Because their yi belongs to them, their mind, their psyche belongs to. There's no way to join with another yi, at least yet. Apparently, the AI people are trying to overcome this, and we'll have the great singularity or whatever the hell it's called. But Lao Tzu says, no, in the end, our yi, our mind is our own. Everyone's mind is their own. But that's not a bad thing because it means you actually have control over your own life. Someone else does not in the end. And you're in the end responsible for your yi. Someone else is not. So that the fact that you are separate from others in this fundamental way um, should be empowering instead of terrifying, I guess I would say. The other themes, and I'll go fairly quickly here because you guys have been quite patient. Um, Understanding what is actually inside and what is outside. And the short answer to that is your yi and your chi are inside and everything else is outside. And because it's outside, it is ultimately out of your control. Um, and trying to constantly control it, to control other people's behavior, to control other people's thoughts about you, do other, Instagram seems to be this, it strikes me as this enormous project of trying to control how other people think of us. Do they see me as wonderful and I have a great life? Here, let me show these pictures. You could do that all day long. In the end, you're not going to be able to control how other people feel about you. Uh, why? Because it's outside you. And like so much else, right? Uh, Life happens, things happen, accidents happen, we lose a job, you know, we don't get the grade where we feel like we deserve, what have you. That's outside you. What is inside your yi and your chi, those you can learn to actually control, and they are all you need. This is the same as that. This is actually a really interesting concept. There, for example, in one of the passages that we're going to read, uh, Lao Tzu says something like, what difference between success and failure? And you might stop and say, and hear that and say, well, there's a big difference. There's a big difference between success and failure. Lao Tzu says there isn't. There is actually not a big difference between success and failure because they both they are both in the end one thing. So what does that mean? I remember I actually was bringing up, we were reading this passage with a class once, and I had a student who rarely spoke and who always came to class on his skateboard. And right when I said that, what difference between success and failure, we read it, he suddenly said, that's skateboarding. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, that's skateboarding. He said, if you're a skateboarder, you know that that everything you do as you try to become better at, let's say, at skateboarding, all of your successes require so much failure. So much, like, say I'm trying, I'm putting words, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he's like, say I'm trying to learn a new trick on my skateboard. My success in learning that trick depends upon a lot of failure. And for Lao Tzu, that's true of everything in life, really. That uh, there is, because there is no success without failure, ultimately the two things are not separate. This is the same as that. And so while we have a tendency to really divide things into this is good and this is bad, we should see that the things are connected. It's all part of a single kind of journey, if you will. And the Taoist, someone who's living the Tao, like let's go back to Steph Curry, the basketball player, who's widely regarded as the best shooter of all time. I think it's probably beyond debate, really. He'll miss a lot of shots. He'll miss 5, 10 shots in a row, and yet keep shooting, understanding that the only the only path is to keep playing. And the failure is part of the play. And this is true, I think, Lao Tzu feels of everything in life. And that the people who get demoralized, derailed by failure fail to appreciate that success requires failure. And this is true of many things, not just success or failure. For Lao Tzu, what many of us see as opposites are one. And the person who is living the Tao understands and is at peace and is balanced about the oneness of everything. That makes sense. That sounds very kind of fancy to phrase it that way, but this is the same as that. So next time you don't do well on a test, don't worry about it. This is the same as that. Your parents might not agree. Um, Finally, the last thing Brad did is he ended his lecture by just drawing a blank on the board, or by drawing just a blank line. And he said, in the end, we've talked about all these different concepts, but this image right here perhaps best captures the essence of the way, of the Tao. It is not something that can be communicated with words. It is not something that you can convince someone of with an argument. It's not something you understand intellectually. It's a way of being that is available to everyone immediately. In fact, Lao Tzu opens the book, bear with me, with a very kind of strange passage that starts to point out, I'll just look at it quickly. It kind of captures sorry, let me save it, or let me share it here. Um, this here, oops. A way that can be walked is not the eternal way. A name that can be said is not the eternal name. So this, again, this particular passage is a bit more difficult than some others, but it's pointing at once you name it, the Tao is X. You're no longer talking about the Tao. So this one's it's an intense one. You can see why people make a life study of this very strange book. My hope is that this presentation, including that last idea, that you can read the book and it can give you some hints and sort of arrows pointing toward what Lao Tzu is getting at and trying to, articulate, but he's also not trying to articulate it because he's saying it can't be articulated. But these themes help capture some of it, that we know the Tao when we live it ourselves, not when we have it written on a PowerPoint or explained to us by a professor from the other side of the country. But when we live it ourselves, when our mind and body are together in the present, balanced, at home, focusing on the small steps with humility, knowing that we don't need anything more than we have. You could go loving our life, loving today in silence, having let go of things from the past. All those things can accumulate to get you close to an understanding of the kind of kung fu that you get from the Tao, from the way. But in the end, you are both already a master of the Tao. Lao Tzu will say this elsewhere. He'll say everyone is a master of the Tao. It is available. The way is available to everyone immediately, and everyone can be equally good at it. But the world it does not always make it easy for us to have the kind of balance that Lao Tzu believes is ultimately the secret to, I guess we could say, happiness, because the world is all about change. That's fine, but it doesn't mean that we have to be as chaotic as the world. So that is Brad's lecture, or my best attempt today to capture the ideas that he covered. I think as we make our way through different passages in the book, we're not going to read the whole book. We're not even going to read it in order. But as we make our way through different passages, uh, you will see some of these ideas being expressed in different ways. And so hopefully this lecture can help you kind of not feel, because it's easy when you read the book to just kind of say, huh? The hell is this guy talking about? I found that having some of these themes, having some of these ideas presented to me, helped give me a better understanding of the richness of this philosophy, which is a guiding philosophy to many millions of people around the world, even now. And I think continues to offer valuable wisdom to all of us, whatever our philosophical or religious beliefs might be. And some of these ideas that we see here, I think you see echoed or reflected in other worldviews, other ways of thinking too. So this type of wisdom is not unique to Lao Tzu's strange little book. Thank you guys very much for your extended attention. It's a lot to sit for an hour and 15 minutes on Zoom. But I do hope you found this to be of some value. I'm going to stop the recording now.